Hello and welcome. I am Exit Light, and this is my channel. It's been a while since we have done an unsolved murder. So I thought that tonight we could look into the murder of the Grimes sisters, who were 15 and 13 years old at the time of their death. I think I chose this particular story because it feels off in ways that other stories don't. We'll get into that as we're going along with the details, and then maybe we can have a conversation below. You can tell me what you think. If you think that the things I feel are a little off, if you feel that too, or maybe you don't, and if not, why not? And is there something else that you do think is strange? So, let's get started with the mystery, the true unsolved murder of these girls, Barbara and Patricia Grimes. This murder happened quite a while ago, but it's still unsolved. I don't think that we should put a timeline on unsolved murders of when it's too late to take a look back with a set of fresh eyes. Someone out there knows who killed these girls. Murderers don't always keep those details to themselves, and oftentimes there are details that someone may have noticed or have heard that they don't think is relevant, but can be crucial to solving a murder case. So, on December 28th, 1956, Barbara, who was 15, and Patricia, who was 13, went to the Brighton Theater to see the Elvis Presley movie, Love Me Tender. The theater was about 1.5 miles from the girls' home. They had between them $2.15. Keep in mind, this was 1956. It is not known how they got to the theater, which is something that we're going to come back to. There's something about that bothers me a little. So like I said, as we move on, we're going to come back to that detail. Patricia's friend, Dorothy Weinart, sat behind the girls with her own younger sister during the movie. Dorothy and her sister left during the intermission because it was a double feature showing that night. And for those of you that don't know, oftentimes there were double features shown. Usually it was with scary movies, and they would be related in somehow to Dracula movies, to swamp person movies. In this case, there were 2 Elvis Presley movies, and the way they would do it usually was the new release and then maybe an older release so they could get money from that movie again. Sometimes they had intermissions during one movie and people could go out and get another drink or another popcorn or use the restroom. But in this particular case, the intermission was between the 2 movies. Now, that intermission was about 9:30, and it's the last time that Patricia's friend and her sister saw the Grimes sisters, and they were standing in the popcorn line. According to everyone who had seen the girls that night, including Dorothy and her sister, the Grimes sisters, Barbara and Patricia, both seemed to be in a good mood. They didn't notice that there was anything wrong. They didn't think that the girls seemed nervous. They were their usual selves, and there was nothing unusual. Barbara and Patricia stayed for the second film, and they were expected to be home at 11:45. When there was no sign of them by midnight, their mother, Loretta, sent their older brother and sister to wait by the nearest bus stop for them to get off the bus. After 3 buses came and stopped that night without the sisters getting off, the siblings returned home at 2:15. So 2.5 hours later, the siblings decide that they're going to go home, which is the time that their mother reported Barbara and Patricia missing. Okay, so here's where we're going to talk about something that I find to be a little off, a little strange about the mother in particular. They lived 1.5 miles from the movie theater. Not one sibling, and not the mother, could tell the police officers how these girls, 15 and 13, traveled to the movie theater. They don't know if they took a bus. They don't know if they walked. They don't know if somebody came and picked them up. They just went to the movie theater. And now, I understand that this was 1956, and parenting back then was a little more laid back than it seems to be right now. But even then, you don't know how your child was getting to the movie theater. I guess I just wonder how that happens. How you can just, that can totally escape you. Okay, and add to that, the girls were expected home at 11:45. Let's say that intermission started at 9:30 and went 15 minutes, which puts the girls back in the theater at 9:45. In those days, and for quite a while afterwards, they didn't have previews for movies, but what they did have before movies was cartoons. And those cartoons would probably last about 10 to 15 minutes, the length of what we now are used to seeing previews for other movies. So that would put the movie starting at, let's say, 10. I looked, and Love Me Tender was 1.5 hours long. So I'm going to say that the second movie was probably 1.5 hours long as well. That will put the movie over at 11:30. And the mother was expecting the girls home by 11:45, which is cutting it pretty close, depending on when the bus would get there. If the bus was running on a regular schedule, maybe every half an hour, every 15 minutes, probably every half an hour, then the bus would have gotten there at 11:30. And in that case, the girls could have missed that bus if the movie wasn't over till then. I don't see how it would really be possible for the girls to be home at 11:45. However, that was when they were expected home. So then the girls are not home by midnight, and their mother sends their older brother and sister to wait at the bus stop for the girls. So at midnight, the mother thinks, okay, they should have been home at least by now. The siblings stayed at the bus stop for 2.5 hours. And the mother, at no point between midnight and 2:15, thought that she should be on the phone to the theater. And keep this in mind. Not like today where you cannot call a theater and speak to somebody. You used to be able to call a movie theater and somebody would pick up the phone. It never mentions that the mother called anybody. It never mentions that she picked up a phone and asked if there were 2 girls at the theater that matched her daughter's description. It never says that she, went to the bus stop and showed any concern that it was coming up on 2:15 and 3 buses had already come and left. The mother aspect of the story feels really strange to me. I don't know if there was a father involved or not. But the utter disregard that the mother shows for how her children got to the movie theater, or how late they were, until it's much, much past when the daughter should have been there. To me, that feels off. Very, very strange. So, You tell me, does that feel strange to you? And we can take into consideration that, there was no helicopter parenting per se back then. For most people, it was pretty laid back. But this is so laid back that it's concerning to me. Now, you tell me, would that concern you? Does that concern you? Does that seem odd to you? That a mother would not know how her child got to a movie? Or would not start calling by an hour after the movie ended? Asking, are they still there? Have you seen them? Something? So let's talk about that down below, and then we'll move on right now. So the disappearance of these two girls launched one of the biggest missing person cases in Chicago's history. It produced a lot of reports of sightings, but there was never anything in the way of hard evidence. Initially, it was thought that they might have run away to Nashville, Tennessee. Apparently, these girls were huge Elvis Presley fans, and the police thought that perhaps they ran away to go see Elvis Presley. It was such a large part of this investigation that on January 19th, 1957, a statement was released from Elvis Presley's estate in Graceland that said, if you are a good Presley fan, you will go home and ease your mother's worries. So even Elvis Presley was caught up in this missing children's case. And this leads me to wonder if maybe the mother wasn't worried because the girls were, maybe they got into some trouble. Maybe it wasn't unusual that they would take their time to get home from an event. Maybe that's why the mother was so laid back, which is possible. So let's discuss that below too. If you think that is maybe a reason why the mother was really not too concerned or too involved at the very beginning of this case. Okay, now I'm going to list you the sightings. And normally I wouldn't go real deep into all of the sightings because usually if they're unwarranted, if there was no proof, they don't, deserve to be added to the story. But there were so many sightings that were so right on to this being these girls that I'm going to go ahead and add them because it's another weird aspect of this story. Numerous people said that they saw the girls boarding a CTA bus heading east into the city after the last movie. They said that they allegedly got off the bus about halfway to their home around 11:05 p.m., which that really doesn't make sense to me unless they left the movie early and did not stay for the entire second screening. So the question is, how did several people see them on the bus, get off the bus halfway to their house, and why would they get off the bus halfway to being home? Then, after that, two teenage boys said that while they were driving through their neighborhood at approximately 11:30, they saw the sisters together and said that they were giggling and jumping around and playing around with each other. At this point, they were approximately 2 blocks from their home. So maybe that's why they got off the bus early. They wanted to walk the rest of the way. They weren't expected home until around 11:45. It gave them a little free time before they had to go home. A classmate of Patricia's was eating at a restaurant called Angelo's on the evening of December 29th. And she reported that she saw Patricia walking past her with 2 other unidentified young girls. Now, this would be the day after they had gone missing. I can only assume that a classmate of Patricia's would recognize her. I don't know if she would recognize her sister or not. But then that adds, if it was her sister as one of the younger girls, then who would be the other younger girl with them? So on December 30th at 5:40 in the morning, the owner of the D&L restaurant said that he had seen both of the girls that morning and that Patricia appeared to be drunk or sick and was in such a state that she was unable to walk without staggering. The owner said that he saw them with someone who would become a lead suspect. His name was Benny Bedwell. This restaurant was 5.5 miles from the Brighton Theater. Then a clerk at the Claremont Hotel viewed the bodies after they had been found, and he also identified the sisters as having checked into a hotel on that exact same date, 2 days from when they'd been missing. Then on January 1st, the girls were reported having been seen on another bus. The following week, a night clerk at the Unity Hotel said that they refused a room to the two girls because they were too young to stay in the hotel by themselves. Then on January 3rd, 3 employees of a department store reported that they saw the girls listening to Elvis Presley music at the record counter. Adding credence to the theory that both sisters had run away to Nashville, a woman reported having met them at a bus station there and accompanied them to a state employment agency to search for work. A clerk at the same state agency identified the sisters from photographs and recalled them using their last name as Grimes. On January 14th, the parents of Patricia Grimes' classmate, Sandra Tolston, received 2 troubling phone calls around midnight. When the first call came in, they answered the phone, and nobody on the other line would speak. 15 minutes later, another call came in. Sandra's mother, Anne, said that she heard a frightened and depressed voice asking, "Is that you, Sandra? Is Sandra there?" Anne went to go bring her daughter to the phone, but by the time her daughter had gotten to the phone, the girl on the other end of the line, had hung up. Anne states that she was convinced that that voice was Patricia Grimes. After there had been a little bit of a thaw and some rain, on January 22nd, a construction worker who was named Leonard Prescott spotted the nude bodies of the Grimes sisters behind a guardrail just off the side of the road. He was initially unsure of what he had seen, and so he later returned with his wife, Mary, who reportedly fainted upon taking a closer look. Barbara Grimes was laying on her left side with her legs just a little bit slightly drawn up toward her body. Patricia Grimes was laying on her back, and her body was covering the top part of her sister's head. It was thought that it looked like they had just been thrown out of a passing car. The autopsy performed by experienced pathologists concluded that due to their stomachs containing the approximate proportions of their last known meal, both sisters had probably died within about 5 hours of the time they were last seen at the theater, which would have been on the evening of December 28th or the very early morning of the 29th. However, Harry Gloss, who was at the time the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office, disagreed with that time of death. He pointed to a thin layer of ice found on the bodies of both girls and said that that indicated that they had been alive at least until January 7th, since only after that date would there have been enough snowfall to react with their warm bodies to create the thin layer of ice, let alone hide their bodies until the discovery, which is confusing because, like the coroner said, they had their last meal that was known to probably their mother still in their stomachs. And then you go back to all those verified accounts of their sightings. So it's really confusing because those sightings were, collaborated with each other. So it's very confusing as to when their time of death was. That's another very strange aspect to this story, that two people that didn't even know each other said that they had, one had seen the girls at a bus stop and taken them to look for work, and that the woman at the place where they went to work, she also verified that they were the girls and that their last name was Grimes. So, I don't know, it's a little confusing, to say the least. Obviously now, in this day and age, we probably have a lot more information, but because of the time when it was, we'll probably never know for sure how long they had been alive before they were found on the side of that road. There was no obvious fatal wounds on either of the girls' bodies, and there was nothing to indicate that they had either been drunk or drugged or poisoned. Despite being quote-unquote very clean, both corpses had various bruises to their bodies. And on Barbara's chest, there was found 3 puncture wounds that seemed to have possibly come from an ice pick. It was also later revealed by authorities that it appeared that Barbara had likely had intercourse with someone around the time of her death, and it did not appear to have been forcible. The immediate cause of death was listed as secondary shock, resulting from exposure to the very low temperatures. So, suspects. Benny Bedwell. As you remember earlier, we had talked about how he was seen in a restaurant with the girls. Well, he was 21 years old. He was illiterate and he was a drifter. He was from Tennessee, and many people said that he bore some resemblance to Elvis Presley. According to Minnie Duros, who was the owner of the Deal Nail restaurant, where Bedwell worked as a dishwasher, so she would clearly recognize him and clearly know that it was him in her restaurant at 5:40 in the morning. And she had stated that he was there with the Grime sisters on the morning of December 30th. Bedwell was booked on murder charges on January 27th because he signed a confession stating that he and another man had been with the Grime sisters January 7th, and after 7 days of drinking, and they fed the girls hot dogs, and then they beat them to death for refusing their advances. And they finally discarded their bodies on January 13th. Loretta Grimes, who is the mother of both the girls, she said about Benny Bedwell's confession that she felt that it was a lie, that her girls would never go to that part of the city. It was a part of the city that her girls wouldn't even know about. And he was later withdrawing his confession, saying that he had made it up. And that he made it up because he had been coerced by the sheriff's department. Also, the autopsy reports later showed that their bodies did not have any alcohol or hot dogs in their systems, nor had they been beaten to death. Also, Benny was clocked into his other job, which was at an Ajax company, from 4:19 in the evening on December 28th to 12:30 in the morning on December 29th. So he was somewhere and known to be there at the time that the girls were likely abducted. However, Harry Gloss, If you remember him, he was the chief investigator for the Cook County Coroner's Office. He strongly believed that Bedwell had committed these murders. He later charged that the marks found on the girls' bodies had not been adequately investigated. He further went on to state that there was evidence that the girls had been, in fact, beaten to death, and also evidence that both girls had engaged in sexual activity. And in his story, he believes that the official investigation was covering up these parts of the story because it would make these girls look bad, and they didn't want to damage these children's reputation by saying that they had been out drinking and had, been with these men. And he said that he in fact believed that that was a true story, that Bedwell had actually done a confession, and it did go in line with Bedwell's confession. And to back Harry up, similar allegations were repeated over many, many, many years from several different people who have claimed to have seen the original case files. And because Harry refused to retract his statements, saying that the coroner was hiding evidence and destroying evidence, he was eventually fired on February 15th. Then there was Max Fleeg. He was a 17-year-old suspect in the case, and he voluntarily took a polygraph test and failed it. After failing the polygraph, he allegedly confessed to kidnapping both girls. However, because at the time it was illegal to perform polygraph tests on a minor, police had to let him go. He was never charged with the murders because there was never any evidence that he did kill them or kidnap the girls, other than his alleged confession and the polygraph failure. Later on, some years later, he did go to prison for an unrelated murder of a young girl. So, this case remains unsolved. Their mother, Loretta, died in 1989, never knowing any facts about the case. She will never know, never learned whether her girls had been kidnapped, whether they had voluntarily gone somewhere. The facts of how someone could kidnap two girls, 15 and 13, how there didn't appear to be unconsensual contact with the girls. It appeared to be consensual. How you would kill both girls without any clear reason, any clear wound, any clear injury. And if they did die because of exposure to the cold, if somebody had come along that road and found the girls, could they have been saved? Nobody will ever know. And the mother died not knowing. In 2013, Ray Johnson, who was a retired West Chicago police officer, began to investigate this cold case, all on his own. He became interested in the case when, in 2010, he was researching a book that he was writing about the city's history. He went to the Grimes sister's brother, who was 68 years old in 2013. He'd been 11 years old when his sisters had been killed. And he was very happy that Mr. Johnson was reopening the case, and he was quoted as stating that, "I just assumed it was never going to be solved, but maybe there's hope." And maybe there is hope. Maybe someone knows something, saw something that they didn't think was relevant. Maybe this will jog their memory. And maybe these girls will be allowed to rest in peace. It's a very strange and sad story of the loss of life of these two sisters so early on, with no evidence, no clear evidence of what happened to them, what path they went down, and how they ended up on the side of that road. Thank you for listening. As always, if you have any information, if you know anyone who lived in that area during that time, and could ask them if they remember this case, if they remember something, no matter how small, that could be helpful to get a hold of the Chicago Police Department. Good night.
Hi everyone, make sure to subscribe to Exit Live and give this video a big thumbs up. And don't forget to share with all of your friends.